what is this presentation all about? Well, it's about getting back to business and then maybe going out of business and then back into business again. Because as we've seen already, particularly in Victoria, we're going to get these outbreaks of clusters, and it may mean that for certain municipalities, there could be a temporary shutdown or closure, and then reopen again. So we're going to have to get used to this yo-yoing effect of in and out of business and temporary closing down, or reducing the number of people allowed within our businesses, or continuing to work from home, or after going back to an office, having to go and work at home again during these outbreaks. I think it's important to emphasize that this is about getting back to business in the COVID-19 era. It is not entitled post-COVID-19. That will only happen when a vaccine has been found, or we eradicate the virus in some other means, or we become completely immune to it. This is a long-term change in how we live, in how we transact, and how we do business. I'm going to teach you a new word today. I love my play on words, and whilst we look upon the word pandemic as negative and something to be concerned about, my new word for you guys is plandemic. We hope that if nothing else, as a result of having to grapple with COVID-19 and having to get back to business in any shape or form we can, and by using risk management techniques, we will see a plandemic, or more and more people making plans and using risk management methodologies to try and reduce the impact that COVID-19 will have, and also better prepare themselves for any future pandemics, natural disasters, or whatever. We want risk management to become contagious. We want people to catch the risk management virus, and hence we want our very own risk management plandemic. Now, of course, we always have to have our little disclaimer. The purposes of this webinar is to inform you, to give you some pointers and some advice, but really it's down to all of us. We are all risk managers. We are all responsible for managing our risk. So here's the agenda for today, and we're just a few basic points. We're going to navigate through the government's easing of restrictions. Then we're going to look at some basic risk engineering fundamentals that can help you or help your customers perform risk assessments, and to better understand the hierarchy of controls. There's always more than one way to resolve an issue or a problem or deal with a hazard. We're also going to give you some pointers and some advice on how you can help your customers. At a time whenever you're busy transacting insurance, we can see that insurance is not always the answer that our businesses and our customers need. They also need to have a better understanding of risk management, and hence my earlier comment, we need a plandemic of risk management. So we'll give you just one example of a one-page action plan that will help most of your small businesses just get their heads around the whole concept of performing risk assessments, particularly on something that is completely new and different. Finally, we'll tell you where you can get some further help and assistance, and then we'll have our questions and answers at the end. So by the end of this webinar, what's in it for you? You'll be able to have conversations with your customers and help your customers understand the complexity around the easing of restrictions. Provide your customers with a simple framework, a plan with which to assess the risks associated with the restrictions being eased and a return to the workplace. And finally, you will be able to point customers in the right direction for additional detailed references. Now, you've probably already seen this very complex three-step framework, or a three-step plan that the federal government released, in how we will slowly move back to something that resembles normality before March this year. And you need to be familiar with this, and it's a one-page plan and guidance document of how we slowly move from complete lockdown into some form of normal business practice. And very much the first step is focused primarily around the easing of restrictions on the individual and the family. And the steps that really start to impact businesses aren't really until step 2 and step 3. Step 1 is about returning some kind of normal private life and not necessarily, the commercial sector. This slide further, it sort of enhances what I've been saying, that we've seen already that step 1 allowed up to 5 visitors to your home, whereas step 2 was 20, and so on. And the easing of those restrictions as we go through those various steps, they become more appropriate to a wider range of industries and businesses that you and we look after. And as we've seen already, since putting this presentation together, we've seen us about to move in Victoria from step 1 to step 2, but instead we're now hurriedly back into step 1 and increasing some of those restrictions further because of the cluster outbreaks that we will undoubtedly see crop up now and again. Here are some 6 personal fundamentals, and graphics like this are really powerful images. You instantly recognize what they mean, and this is particularly important for people who are in businesses that engage with other people who maybe have English as a second language, for instance. And so in a lot of businesses, you'll see these kind of images start to appear and join alongside a lot of the safety images and safety signs that we've come to accept over time. So maintaining 1.5 meters of physical distancing, staying at home when sick, maintaining your hand hygiene, washing your hands for at least 20 seconds with warm soapy water, or using hand sanitizer if soap is not available. Downloading the COVID Safe app is a great way of tracing people that may have come into contact and allow the authorities to contact people who may have come into contact with somebody who is later diagnosed with the virus. But there are other ways in which we can improve traceability, so we'll touch on that later. Practice respiratory hygiene, coughing and sneezing into your armpit and not onto your hands. You've already seen more and more people practice that hygiene measure. And then the final 6th fundamental is having COVID safe plans. You see, there's that word again, plan. Having a plan for your workplace and your premises. But what does that mean? What does that look like? And that's what we'll go through today. So here's a very complex image, but to those who are involved in risk management, and risk assessment forms part of risk management, this stems from the Australian Standard 4360. That's an Australian standard that was created well over a decade ago, maybe longer, and it was a specific Australian standard on risk management. And then from that, it developed and became an international standard, ISO 31000. So this is an Australian first. It was Australia that created a process that was recognized uniformly as a step-by-step way of conducting risk assessments. And that's become global. Australia has a very, very proud history of being inventors and entrepreneurs, and we developed the risk management standard. So it's important to be aware of that, to know where you can get some information that's related to ISO 31000, get a copy of the standard yourselves. But this image is the main focus of the entire process. Establishing the context means simply creating an understanding of what it is we're going to assess. And then the risk assessment part is 3 simple steps of identifying the risk, analyzing its harm, evaluating that risk. And then once you've done your risk assessment, we can start to treat the risk or come up with solutions that will reduce or remove that hazard. And all throughout this, we have to continually monitor and review. And so it becomes a cyclic process that we repeat time and time again. And the green bar on the left, communication and consultation are key. We always have to communicate with our staff or with our customers, with our suppliers, and so on. But this is an image maybe that you haven't seen, this inverted triangle called the hierarchy of control. This is particularly important when we start to evaluate our risks and we want to treat them. What control mechanism should we use to reduce or even remove the hazard? So starting at the top, the most effective controls are at the top and the least effective are at the bottom. So we can move from elimination to substitution to engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally PPE. And yet all we've heard about throughout the whole coronavirus situation has been talk of gloves and also face masks. And that's really the least effective PPE. We need to look at elimination or engineering controls to eradicate the virus. So I'm going to take you through one example, one simple, everyday, common feature that we have in our homes, we have in our offices. Every building has them by definition, and that is a door. We've taken doors for granted. We've needed them for centuries. They give us privacy, they give us security. But now all of a sudden, because of the coronavirus, it has become a hazard. Or the hazard really is the fact that we have to touch that door and we could potentially contaminate the door and then contract the virus by touching handles and so on and so forth. So if we assume that we're assessing that risk of a door harboring the virus and passing it on to people where they have to move through the door and touch it, it becomes a pinch point and a point of concern. So could we eliminate the hazard of the door or the contaminated door? Can the door be physically removed? Now, in a lot of cases, if it's an external door, the answer is obviously not. But in internal situations, do we really need that door? Can we accept maybe a little bit less privacy in small meeting rooms if we didn't have the door? You know, that's one option, but it's probably less likely to be acted upon. What about substitution? Can the door be replaced? What about replacing the door with an automated door, one that automatically opens or slides as people approach it, therefore eliminating not the door, but the need to touch the door or open a handle? The third hierarchy of control is engineering solutions. Can the door be isolated? For instance, can the door be kept locked or handles removed or another method of entry established? So coming up with other engineering type solutions that keep the door in place so that it can perform its principal function of privacy or security, but is there a way in which we can eliminate some of the more hazardous features around handles and so on? Engineering controls would be very closely related to the substitution example I gave earlier, where we automate a door. The next least effective control is administrative controls. Can the door be opened by other means, such as using elbows? Can someone be posted at the door to open and close the door for you? Regularly cleaning the handles and so on. Issuing guidance on good ways to open a door that lessens the likelihood of contamination. And then finally, PPE. That's the bottom rung of the ladder when it comes to controlling a hazard. And perhaps just by simply providing staff with disposable gloves, having hand sanitizer stations either side of the door, and signs displayed requesting the use of those, before opening and closing the door. By the way, only the other day I discovered and saw for the first time a hand sanitizer dispenser that was controlled by your foot, and by standing on it, a little lever pressed the plunger at the top, and so it was a very simple way of automating the dispensing of hand sanitizer. And of course, as you know, you can get automatic ones as well. So that's the hierarchy of controls, and that's important. That's an important toolkit to have in the back of your mind every time we identify a hazard and we want to reduce the impact that that hazard might have. And so I move on then to this simple plan that I've come up with, this 4 sections of this plan of the mnemonic of 4 letters, PACE, P-A-C-E. I like to, have some wordplay around these things because it's an easy way of remembering this particular roadmap or pathway to dealing with our risk assessments as our customers go back to business. So we're going to use the word PACE. The P stands for people, assets, customers, and then economic at the end. And these are the pathways when we sit down to conduct our risk assessments. Let's risk assess, first of all, the hazards to our people. And then we move on to risk assessing the assets, and then the customers, and then the economic situation, or basically our business operations. So first of all, let's consider just a couple of points around our people. There's that word again, consultation and communication, that's been drawn out of ISO 31000, and preparing and consulting with our people so that they are involved in this decision-making process, and making sure that whatever decisions we take around controlling the situation and limiting hazards, that our people, our employees are on board. And sometimes you might find they will come up with some very practical examples and solutions themselves. So it's key to communicate. And there are various ways and different methods of communicating. Look at this webinar, for instance, right now. Or who even heard of Zoom before COVID-19? So there are many technological advances recently in how we communicate with each other, and we've got multiple media that we can use to communicate. As we get back to business, and as we unlock the doors and re-enter our business premises and throwing the doors open to customers, it's important first that our employees are retrained and go through almost a brand new induction prior to commencing work. As we've started to slowly send our risk engineers back out to do site visits, we've done just that. We have had a COVID-19 induction. Just like you would when you first start a new job, we're going into a new era. So we had an induction delivered by webinar so that all of our team were familiar with new best practice, new ways of doing things. And so we've trained them in how to conduct themselves when they go to site, how to minimize the amount of time on site. And again, you can do that again with your employees, and certainly encourage your customers to do the same thing. And also at the same time, over the last few months, we've worked in completely different environments. A lot of people have been working from home. And so as we maybe relax and go back to a different work regime or a workplace or a work environment, we might need to consider refamiliarization with some of those pre-existing policies and procedures that we had before, because we all get a little bit forgetful. We might forget some of those common standard practices and procedures that we always did whenever we were in the workplace prior to March of this year. So when we're considering people, and particularly safety, there are a lot of resources available to you. Now, Safe Work Australia, if you like, is at a federal level, They do not regulate OC health and safety legislation. They don't manage workers' compensation schemes. So it's also important that we consult with the relative bodies that exist around occupational health and safety in each state and territory. But the Safe Work Australia website does contain lots of new information. And towards the end of April, there was something like, I think, 1,900 pages were created on the Safe Work Australia website to specifically address the COVID-19 situation and provide resources to employers and employees. And so if you haven't looked at it already, it's a great place to go to. And they have very cleverly sorted all of this information by some of the more common industry types, as you can see here in the graphic here, to easily find the necessary resources that your customers might need. But also bear in mind that there will be additional requirements, there will be additional guidance from the relative state and territory bodies such as WorkSafe. So we move on to our next second letter of the word PACE, and that is our assets. Obviously, people are our most important asset in any business, but let's have a look at the other assets around our buildings, our mobile plant and equipment, our machinery, etc., and stock. There are many considerations that we need to focus on when we consider fixed and mobile assets. And there's too many for us to consider just in this webinar. We've got at Zurich a number of guides that will help specifically with preparing buildings and machinery, equipment, and even your fleet and stock items for a return to work. And they are available on a dedicated page on our website. When it comes to cleaning, man, we have to clean like we've never cleaned before. Cleaning will become a profession, and it's something that we have to accept and do more rigorously as we go forward. And we've already seen, sadly, you know, with the outbreaks we've seen recently in some of the quarantine hotels, the lack of practicing good cleaning around the buildings has perhaps led to some of those clusters. Also think about maintenance of plant and equipment and other assets. If that plant and equipment has been lying dormant for some time, even just a few weeks, it can create additional wear and tear, particularly when it starts up again, and particularly if it's starting from what we call a cold start. It's been idle for a long time. So if some machinery and equipment, particularly large bulky machinery that has rotating parts, it's always good practice that if they're going to be dormant for some time more, that they are what we call inched or quarter turned to stop things seizing up. It would be good practice before we restart any machinery or equipment to look up the manuals and the guidance documents that go with that equipment, to consult with the manufacturers and other specialists about the proper way of restarting equipment, particularly from a cold, solid state. Pay particular attention to vehicles if they've been parked up for a long period of time. There is a potential risk for contamination of fuel caused by condensation in the fuel tank, and you can get around that by adding fuel additives that prevent that contamination from taking place. But there could be flat batteries, deflated tires, and so on and so forth. So, you know, if the car or your business vehicle has been parked, you know, at the factory or at a depot and it's been idle for weeks, possibly even months, don't assume that you can just jump straight in, start the key and drive off. There should be a good health check conducted on the vehicle. And finally, stock. Any stock items that have been kept on site may have been infected by vermin and pests, and also you need to pay close attention to use-by dates that may have expired, and certainly consider some kind of stock rotation. So let's take just one example from that previous slide in cleaning. According to the Journal of Medicine in New England, USA, the coronavirus will continue to be a threat on different types of surfaces for longer periods of time. If you look at the examples here, in the air, the virus is contagious, if you like, for up to 3 hours. On copper, it's up to 4 hours. On cardboard, up to 24 hours. Look at the explosion we've had in home deliveries. And we're seeing faster and quicker prompt deliveries from warehouse to home. So there is a potential for that cardboard box to be contaminated, and it has been found to stay in the cardboard for up to 24 hours. But then look at plastic and stainless steel, up to 2 or 3 days even. And look at how much plastic and stainless steel we have in our homes or in our offices. You know, go back to the door example earlier. Look how many handles and hand plates on doors are made of stainless steel. That critical pinch point, that point where we come into contact with the door most often, is made out of a material that is potentially liable to retain the virus for longer, and up to 2 to 3 days. I was reading recently that the coronavirus RNA, or ribonucleic acid, which is what gives the virus its genetic material, was found on the cruise ship the Diamond Princess 17 days after the passengers and crew had left. So make sure that you review cleaning contracts. It doesn't mean that you change contractors, but at least review the detail of the cleaning that's undertaken. And don't cut corners. Now is not the time to save money on your cleaning contracts. Now is the time to invest in it. You need to sit down with your contractors and walk through your premises all over again and reconsider how much effort needs to go into cleaning, particularly at points where people are likely to come into contact more closely with each other, such as doors and so on, and there needs to be regular cleaning. Finally, empty buildings can attract vermin and pests. Whether there is food consumed on the premises or not, be prepared to remove more than just the invisible bugs. So we move on to our third pathway, our third part of our plan as we develop our risk assessment, and that is the letter C for customers. And these are just a few examples of how you can provide advice to your businesses, because they're your customers, and how they can support their customers. Communication is important, and we've seen this daily throughout the lockdown and also the easing of restrictions. There are daily bulletins, daily broadcasts by our leaders at federal and state government levels. We listen now more than we ever did before. We pay attention to statistics more than we ever did before. We have learned new terminology, all because of the coronavirus. There has been an awakening to health and hygiene, more than there has been for recent years. Clear, concise, and articulate messaging is crucial in the fight against COVID-19. Use your website, your mailing lists, social media, and also, of course, this kind of forum, webinars, Teams, or Zoom. Be also prepared for the habits of our customers to change. Just think what you do differently now compared to what you did before March this year. Think about how we meet and greet each other and physical distancing. Will we ever see a handshake again? Or are we going to get used to touching elbows and tapping feet? Also think more seriously though about how our customers' buying habits will change. We are all more likely to buy online, have things delivered to our home, or at least it's certainly a significant option that more people in our communities are considering. The time of day when we go about our various chores, when we do our shopping, and business has also changed as we work from home. When we worked in an office, when we worked in a factory or a warehouse, we typically worked set hours of 9 to 5. And so our shopping would be done in the evenings or weekends. But now with flexible working, we can go and shop at different times of the day. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be a disruption. And so, your customers and our customers need to fully understand and be prepared for these subtle changes in how our customers will transact and do business and how their behaviors will change. Think carefully about the practicalities of employees coming to work and about using public transport, another critical pinch point. Public transport versus private transport versus working from home. Juggling all of these, the pros and cons of all of these. And when in a workplace, how do we maintain a safe distance? How do we stay, regimental in our separation from people? Have you considered, for instance, a one-way system around your office and just simply moving around the office in a circular way or in a clockwise fashion might prevent having to cross paths with people. May not be so workable, but I have certainly seen it in warehouses, for instance. Introducing screens for staff who deal at the front line with visitors and customers. Do we need to start to insert these at our receptions? And what about the provision of hand sanitizer and maybe even PPE, gloves, masks, or whatever, if it's appropriate? Who do we believe? What guidance should we follow? Check the Safe Work Australia website. That's where you'll get your information. And always, always listen to communication because things will change. Now here in Victoria, they are starting to think that in those municipalities that have had high clusters recently, that they may enforce people to wear masks. That's the first time it's been talked about. And of course, if you do provide PPE, be sure that you provide very detailed instructions and guidance on how to put the PPE on and take it off again. There is a right way and there's lots of wrong ways. So make sure you get it right. I don't know if you've ever had to wear one of those dust masks for a long period of time, but they do become irritable. And the first reaction we want to do is put our hand to our face to pull the elastic away a little bit or pull the mask away to relieve the warm sensation that we have when we're enclosed within that mask. And that's actually not a good thing to do, because if we have not washed our hands, if we haven't sanitized our hands and we've touched something and then we touch our mask, we're putting potential risk close to our face. And finally, what about visitors? We can't ban them. We need visitors for business transactions. We need contractors coming onto our premises for maintenance and cleaning. And more than ever before, consider what their PPE needs are. Should they provide their own PPE? Should you stipulate that they must supply their own PPE? Also, keep a detailed register. Not everybody will have downloaded the COVID Safe app. Not everybody will be traceable. But certainly you will be obligated, or your customers rather will be also obligated, to have a register so that when people visit, or even in the food industry, people who take away food are required to complete a register so that if something is later diagnosed, they can with pinpoint accuracy know who was on the premises at that time who may have become infected, and then the authorities can contact them and encourage them to go and get tested. And let's just take one further example when we're considering customers. Online shopping and home delivery was always on the rise prior to COVID-19, but it escalated and is likely to maintain momentum as restrictions ease. It's safer, less person-to-person engagement, and in some cases it's quick or it's more convenient. Do your customers anticipate this, or do your customers' customers anticipate this? How does it impact supply chains, storage arrangements? How does a business estimate fluctuations in demand? Will some businesses be able to have walk-in customers anymore? Some may need to stick to strict appointments and maybe time limits. Restaurants, faced with physical distancing, may need to consider set price menus and time slots and time restrictions. Will working hours become more flexible with staggered workplace hours in order to assist with morning and afternoon rush hours? If so, how does that affect how workers go about their other chores, such as shopping and socializing, etc.? And lastly, the fourth part of our simple one-page plan is the economic side of things, the economic pathway. What we actually mean here is business operations, business resilience, profitability. Let's think a minute about cash flow in terms of credit. Will businesses need to review this in the long term, or at least modify it in the short term, as and when clusters break out, and prevents possibly bills being paid or invoices being sent out? Do we need to reconsider existing terms of credit in the cash supply chain? How will customers wish to pay in the future? Is cash dead? We've all experienced supply and demand interruptions recently. Think about toilet paper, and even more recent in the last day or so, perhaps a repeat of the panic buying in certain suburbs and areas around Melbourne. Why was there a rush on toilet paper, but not essentials like food and bottled water? As we experience more clusters and individuals needing to isolate, we will still encounter small pockets of disruption. How can we safeguard against that? Are there duplicate suppliers we need to engage with? Or do we need to have healthier stockpiles and rely less on just in time? And what about these newfound efficiencies we've forcibly discovered, like working from home, meetings involving multiple people via Zoom, WebEx, and Teams? Is there now a better, faster, more convenient, cheaper, safer way of doing business? Cities were created in the last industrial revolution due to the need to have large quantities of labour close to factories, as the economies of scale is what created maximum supply to meet demand at an affordable cost. Will we see a return to cottage industries where quality and business-to-business deliveries create a new cost efficiency that allows us to work from home and be less reliant or need a city? Maybe now is the time to reconsider our business models, make them new, duplicated, resilient, or just different. And finally, one last example when we consider the economic or business operation pathway. Let's take the simple aspect of paying for something. Is cash dead? It's filthy, dirty money. We've experienced more use of contactless payments, PayPass and the like. But transactions over $100 typically need PIN numbers. So do we need to consider gloves or other kinds of coverings needed before letting people use keypads? I recently made a purchase in Harvey Norman's, and they instructed me to pull a tissue out of a box, to wrap it around my finger before I put in my 4-digit PIN number. What about other methods of payment that maybe are even more contactless? PayPal or Afterpay, for instance. Will there be other forms of credit, banking, and transaction emerge? I want you to think about the Skip app. And I don't know how many of you will be familiar with Skip, but it's a great app to buy your coffee. And let's face it, Australians love their coffee. It's like the Uber of coffee, if you like. It allows us to locate the nearest coffee shop that uses the Skip app. You can pre-order your coffee or coffees. You can choose the size, the type of coffee, what kind of milk you want, sugar, and so on. And it will order that coffee for you, and it's linked to your bank account or your credit card. It will seamlessly do the transaction, so no transaction is needed when you go to pick up your coffee. It also helps the coffee shop understand the patterns of workflow, and they can start to see if there's a surge of demand coming their way in the next 15 minutes, and so they can divert some of the staff away from temporary tasks and focus on helping the barista with the big order of coffee that's coming down through the app. Now that was around before COVID-19. And I, unfortunately, where I live, did not have any coffee shops that use Skip. Now I've got 4. So more coffee shops are joining the Skip app. And that's just one example of a new way of doing business in transacting and becoming even more contactless. Check it out next time you go to get a coffee. And so there we have it. There's our plan on a page. It's a very simple way for small businesses, those mums and dads businesses, to sit down and grapple with all that we've talked about before, but using risk management methodologies, understanding the hierarchy of controls, and then focusing on 4 key areas: their people, their assets, their customers, and the economic situation or the business operations. So in summary, remember that the easing of restrictions will not necessarily mean a return to what we knew before COVID-19. The easing of restrictions will differ from state to state, and boy, have we seen that recently. The easing of restrictions will impact each business and each industry completely differently. The easing of restrictions will be complex and continue to present challenges and new challenges to business owners. The easing of restrictions will put more responsibility on business owners and employers to maintain COVID-safe environments for workers, visitors, and customers. And the easing of restrictions will not rule out further temporary closures, lockdowns, etc., as clusters spring up, or individual employees or their families contract the virus and have to stay at home. And finally, remember, we are all risk managers. Guidance exists and it's in bucket loads. Use it. For risk assessments, use clear procedures in the international standard ISO 31000 risk management on how to conduct risk assessments, how to risk rank your identified hazards based on likelihood and severity. Use this as a means to prioritize the way you treat or reduce risk. Remember the triangle, the inverted triangle of hierarchy of controls. Those controls that have the biggest risk reduction can be time-consuming or require more investment, but they will be better at eradicating the hazard. Use pathways when conducting assessments or a roadmap, identifying and assessing hazards and determining controls. Come up with your own. Come up with something different, or use, in this case, the PACE suggestion: people, assets, customers, and economic. Regularly consult expert safety advice and risk management guidance. And finally, in your slide deck, you will have all of these useful links that involve Safe Work Australia, the various state and territory-based workplace safety authorities, and Zurich's own dedicated COVID-19 resources webpage.